Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point in New York. I'm a Naval Officer and Federal Maritime Officer in the United States Merchant Marine. This is part 4 of our 4-part series, and we had just gotten through not only the issues of the Civil War, but posse comitatus, and talking not only about the Coast Guard, but the use of military tribunals here in the United States throughout our, as some would say, short history as a republic. And I had talked about the War Defense Authorization Bill, the Military Commissions Act, and Warner, Senator Warner has been a strong advocate to do away with posse comitatus, which would allow the military to act as a police force, and they've gone way beyond this to where they have, like in the Military Commissions Act, and this is targeted, the language is at Al-Qaeda and terrorists. It's a recreation of the Alien and Sedition Act, or Alien and Seditions Acts, and other laws. And if you look at much of our, not only our own history, but in England, under the kings and queens, they had things called writs of attainder, where they would literally summarize your life, charge you with your life, prosecute you for your life, and then execute you for it. And this goes into issues, and you can look this up on the internet, the Privy Council and Star Chamber, or Spanish Inquisition, or Salem witch hunts. And many of these type of witch hunts, quote unquote, were carried on under McCarthy, and at other times here in the United States. We also had the, the issue of under McCarthy, the hunt for communists, where many individuals, many quote unquote leaders in both houses of Congress turned the American people against each other, to where, just like in the former Soviet Union, they had family members, fellow workers turning each other in and eavesdropping on fellow workers and employees. And it is not a good place. And you see what's going on with the warrantless wiretapping, the eavesdropping, and more. Back into the issues of the MCA and the Warner Defense Authorization Bill, and this goes into Homeland Security and the creation or move of the U.S. Coast Guard into Homeland Security, and it's being spawned as not only a branch of military in Homeland Security, which sounds or seems counterintuitive, because you would think that if it is a regular branch of military in times of peace and war, that it must reside in the Department of Defense and not the Department of Homeland Security. But the Department of Homeland Security, when it was created, was also referred to, and this is in the CRS report for Congress on military tribunals, which gets into the Quirin precedents, Q-U-I-R-I-N, and this was of the 8 German saboteurs that made their way here into the United States in several related cases. This and another you can look into is called Reed versus Covert, and this is from the Korean War. And in that case, it's not the first case precedent, because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the case in, I think, 1956, and then it was reheard in 1957. I would recommend that you read both, but it is the 1957 ruling which is the important one, and in the opinion itself, it outlines the whole long history, not just here in the United States, but even in England and in other countries, of basically using military law or military rule or Napoleonic law, where you are presumed guilty, the presumption of innocence is thrown out the window. And what's happening is the military, like the Navy, and there's an example of this, Lieutenant Watada, he's in the Army, to where he was charged with, I think, failure to turn to at a troop movement. He had been ordered to serve in Iraq, and he said that he wouldn't, said that he would serve in Afghanistan. He opposed the war in Iraq. And rather than his commanders, instead of making a federal issue out of this and going into waste, fraud, abuse, and gross mismanagement and sending him to Afghanistan and just saying, fine, serve in Afghanistan, they have spent an inordinate amount of money prosecuting this individual, going after him, but in it, he has not lost rank, grade, He's been provided with JAG counsel, Judge Advocate General Counsel, to protect him. He's also had private counsel as well. But now, somehow, even though civilians, we the taxpayers, ensure that this is how the military is taken care of when they come under these proceedings, that they do not lose any life, liberty, or property until found guilty, civilians are being prosecuted and denied and held within these proceedings. Some, and I speak from personal experience, I have been within these proceedings myself now for the last 5 years. There are people that have been within these proceedings for the last 10 years. One of the reasons I am speaking out so much about this is because I did go to a military academy. I have been trained on the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I am and consider myself to still be a naval officer to some extent, although this is in dispute with the Coast Guard, not the Navy. I am being denied counsel, denied pay. They have and are been prosecuting me for the last 5 years, and they have stolen medical records, falsified medical records. It's been one thing after another. You would not believe what goes on inside these military tribunals. But as to the Military Commissions Act and other laws that have been passed that you really need to look into and read as if they're written for you, not for foreign terrorists or Al-Qaeda or individuals in Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo, because you see what's going on with the redefinition of torture, and there's great dispute over what the definition of torture actually is, whether it's waterboarding or not. The very same individuals will argue the issue of what constitutes a citizen, so to speak, and the definition of a citizen. And they are attacking even issues of like the issue of what's called an anchor baby, where foreign nationals come in, illegal aliens come in, have a child here in the United States and use it to gain residence. If a helpless child, regardless of how that child got into the United States and was born here in the United States, they are a native son to some extent. If they can take the rights away from that natural-born child, a defenseless child, they can use that as precedence against the rest of us and do the very same thing, even though we were born and raised here in the United States. So you need to be very careful and think a little bit deeper about these issues and not allow your emotions and even your pocketbook to some extent, because some of these issues are very, I don't want to say minor, but they are not happening anywhere near as frequently as we are being led to believe. On February 7, 2007, Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat from Vermont, and Senator Kit Bond, Republican from Missouri, introduced legislation that would revert the Insurrection Act to its previous state, meaning doing away, and Senator Patrick Leahy has been a big advocate of whistleblower rights. Senator Leahy argues that the modifications to the law make it unnecessarily easy to assert federal authority over National Guard elements without the consent of governors, and that the changes removed a quote-unquote useful friction that existed between the Insurrection Act and Posse Comitatus Act. Senator Leahy remarked on September 19, 2006, we certainly do not need to make it easier for presidents to declare martial law, and many would argue are and have been under not only martial law, which is temporary and fleeting, a couple days, couple weeks, but that we are and have been and remain to be under military rule, which goes to military dictatorship, military law, which is Napoleonic in nature, so that if you have any kind of infraction or speak out, you somehow can be prosecuted and you are presumed to be guilty when you enter into these military tribunals. And it is very scary, and people need to become much more aware of what is going on. And back to Senator Leahy remarked on September 19, 2006, quote, we certainly do not need to make it easier for presidents to declare martial law. Invoking the Insurrection Act and using the military for law enforcement activities goes against some of the central tenets of our democracy. And we have people need to note, we have a democratic republic. The first four presidents, and this goes even into people like Aaron Burr and Tammany Hall, we actually had one party that was called the Democratic Republican Party. It was split off several terms into after the Revolutionary War and creation of our nation state. It creates needless tension among the various levels of government. One can easily envision governors and mayors in charge of an emergency having to constantly look over their shoulders while someone who has never visited their communities gives the orders. No mention of this section, 1076, was made in the President's statement about H.R. 5122. This section now 5 allows the President to declare a public emergency and station the military anywhere in America and take control of state-based National Guard units without the consent of the governor or local authorities. Criticism in 1997, and this goes back years, almost 10 years, of weakening the Posse Comitatus Act and using the federal military for domestic conditions, charged that it endangered the military and the U.S., not just us as civilians, but also the military. The Posse Comitatus Act's exceptions in name and exceptions in fact endanger the military and the United States by blurring the traditional lines between military and civilian roles, undermining civilian control of the military, damaging military readiness, and providing the wrong tool for the job. Besides his, bigger hammer. Besides the current drug interdiction exceptions, the 104th Congress considered 2 bills to create new exceptions to the Posse Comitatus Act. The Border Integrity Act, and you can hear about a lot of disputes about what's going on at the borders, and even with the Border Patrol agents like Campion and Ramos, would have created an exception to allow direct military enforcement of immigration and customs laws in border areas. The Comprehensive Anti-Terrorism Act would have allowed military involvement in investigations of chemical and biological weapons. Increasing direct military involvement in law enforcement through border policing, an exception in fact, is an easy case against which to argue. Investigative support, an exception in name, is passive, indirect enforcement. Drug interdiction, an exception in name for the most part, falls between border policing and investigative support because of the extensive military involvement. This case was also argued by the Departments of Justice and Defense in 1979. So you can see, going all the way back through our own history, there is a long and storied history of these attempts to take the military, make it superior to civilians, and subjugate the civilians to military, which is literally setting up a dictatorship. The Posse Comitatus Act expresses one of the clearest political traditions in Anglo-American history, that using military power to enforce civilian law is harmful to both civilians and military interests. The authors of the Posse Comitatus Act drew upon a melancholy history of military rule for evidence that even the best intentional use of the armed forces to govern civilian population may lead to unfortunate consequences. And I can attest to that myself by what I've been through in the last 5 years in dealing with the U.S. Coast Guard and Department of Homeland Security. You won't even believe what they've charged me with, and I won't get into that right now, but please start looking into this. And you can also Google my name on the internet and get into some of these issues where I've actually appeared on the radio and other programs trying to explain them in more depth, and there are some articles out there as well. They knew, moreover, that military involvement in civilian affairs consumed resources needed for national defense. And that's a key point, because they're taking defense dollars and using it, targeting against our own civilians, and drew the armed forces into political, and this is what it's being used for, and legal quarrels that could only harm their ability to defend the country and also injure the civilian, the rights of civilians, due process, and more constitutional rights and protections. Accordingly, they intended that the armed forces be used in law enforcement only in serious cases to which the ordinary processes of civilian law were incapable of responding. And I want to get into some of these issues real quick, and this is about the Coast Guard being formed in 1915. President Woodrow Wilson signed into law the act to create the Coast Guard on January 28, 1915. The act effectively combined the Revenue Cutter Service, which is Treasury agents, Treasury Department, and this was basically for foreign trade and foreign cargo coming into the United States. We funded 100% of our federal government for the longest period of time off of these tariffs or taxes, rather than enforcing these taxes upon the American citizens. This act effectively combined the Revenue Cutter Service with the Life-Saving Service. Think of this. These are not branches of the military. These are not military roles. And tax collection, especially for foreigners. Life-saving service, this is going out and rescuing people on vessels that have either run aground or had other types of problems, and formed the U.S. Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard would grow to incorporate the U.S. Lighthouse Service, which is another aid to navigation for commercial and private shipping and more. The military has plenty of its own assets to take care of this. The Lighthouse Service was incorporated in 1939, and the Navigation and Steamboat Inspection Service was incorporated in 1942. Do any of these sound like they somehow aggregate into being a branch of the military, let alone a special branch of the military. And part of what's going on is that this is part of the energy task force policy, is to militarize not only liquefied natural gas carriers, the issues of oil, research, even union, labor, enforcement, to take all of these issues, and rather than allowing them to get into our Article 3 judiciary, an independent judiciary, to have them all adjudicated under military law within military tribunals here in the United States. And you really, really must understand this issue and how gravely serious it is, and be moved to confront this and complain about this to your congressmen and senators, and have them look into many of the other issues that are going on within the Coast Guard. I want to touch on some of those now. This is the fourth show, and we were going to try to get, there's so much other information. One of the important points is not only the life-saving service, the Treasury Department and Treasury agents, the Lighthouse Service, the Marine Bureau of Inspection, and other agencies that were total civil service. Somehow the Coast Guard and Department of Homeland Security are saying that they are and have been, even though there's all these discrepancies in the record, which includes like issues of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Coast Guard coming under that, no military court of appeals for the Coast Guard for the last 75 or 139 years. Only recently has the Coast Guard started to prosecute in JAG proceedings any of its own personnel, and the very first proceeding that they've had in 139-year history is of a black cadet midshipman at the Coast Guard Academy who, and think about how ridiculous this is, he was promoted from a cadet, a student at the academy, to active service so that they could prosecute him in a military tribunal. And that case in and of itself, A, he should have been transferred to civil authorities. B, if he had done something wrong, it should have been prosecuted and turned over. He should not have lost any life, liberty, or property. He should have been presumed innocent and then prosecuted in an Article 3 proceeding, especially for what he was alleged to have done, which got into sexual assault and I believe a rape. And instead, and to think about the what he would have gotten as far as penalties in a civilian court and what he did in the military tribunal, there are issues of some very grave questions that come up there. Not only that, is the Coast Guard Academy itself was set up, it was a Treasury agent, like almost like Quantico for the FBI. It was set up as a police force academy and not a national police force or National Guard. Because you have to remember that agents and the cutters were actually locally controlled. But another important point is that the cadets at the Coast Guard Academy are called cadets and not midshipmen. At Kings Point, which is the United States Merchant Marine Academy, and I come out of there with a Naval Commission, we are called midshipmen. At the Naval Academy, they are also called midshipmen. These are all, I guess, clues as to what's really going on, and some discrepancies in what the Coast Guard has been claiming that they are and have been a special branch of military since 1915. And I put forth to you that they are not, and they are not intended to be, and they should not be now. They should be and remain to be a civil service unless in the time of declared war they move under the control and auspices of the U.S. Department of Navy. There's other issues that go into also the Coast Guard with the Blackthorn incident that happened in 1980. This was a U.S. Coast Guard cutter that got tangled up with a commercial vessel. The anchor on the commercial vessel snagged the cutter. There were some issues of rights of way. The Coast Guard vessel sank. 23 sailors, Coast Guardsmen, were killed. The captain on this vessel was not brought before a general or summary or special court-martial. He was actually promoted and served in the Coast Guard, even though 23 members of his crew had been killed in this incident. Yet the Coast Guard, as a branch of military, is going after civilian ships captains. There's a recent incident in San Francisco involving the Costco Busan, and the Coast Guard is literally using itself as a preventions department or risk manager for the maritime industry, and not just American flag shipping companies and American flag corporations and even U.S. government agencies, because many of these departments and agencies actually employ federal maritime officers such as myself, and there's a conflict of interest here, but they're also acting as a risk manager or preventions department for foreign corporations that many individuals here in the United States have a leg in on, where they're moving assets out of the country. But also many of these foreign corporations or shipping companies are directly owned and controlled by foreign governments like Singapore, where Singapore owns a majority stake, or did own a majority stake, in American President Lines. American President Lines was a U.S. corporation paid for by U.S. taxpayer dollars that was first privatized and then moved outside of the country. And that was one of our premier flag carriers. And that goes into these issues of the military tribunals, because these are some of the people that the Coast Guard is prosecuting in these military tribunals and wasting U.S. taxpayer dollars rather than if there is an actual true crime violation of 33 or 46 U.S.C. I know in my own situation, the Coast Guard has said that I have not violated the law, but somehow they believe they can go ahead and prosecute me, hold me in these proceedings for 5 years, waste U.S. taxpayer dollars to cover up issues of waste, fraud, abuse, gross mismanagement, and even whistleblowing. There are other issues of the U.S. Coast Guard, which is the Commandant Thad Allen. He was the second in command as a Vice Admiral under Michael Brown in FEMA. You're doing a good job, Brownie, Michael Brown. Before Michael Brown was ousted, or after he was ousted, Commandant, he's now the current Commandant, but at the time he was a Vice Admiral, he was serving in second in command. He took over this civil service agency in FEMA as an admiral of a supposed branch of military, and he is one of the individuals that ordered military troops on the street in the United States to go after American civilians. And this was, it's just such a violation of constitutional principles. And this is one of the reasons he now heads the U.S. Coast Guard, because he was willing to not only use military forces against American civilians in the South in response to, 2 hurricanes, but he's also willing to carry on military tribunals and taking the Quirin precedent of the prosecution of the 8 German saboteurs in World War II and somehow twist and turn that upon American civilians here in the United States. Some of the other issues, and this goes into the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we've touched on that. The Coast Guard, as a special branch of military, is using the Administrative Procedure Act, which is civil service law, to prosecute in Article 2 proceedings civilians and individuals such as myself from other branches of service. I have a Naval Commission, the vessels that they've actually charged me with, which they won't even tell me what they're charging me with, and they're denying me counsel, they're denying me pay, legal aid, medical benefits, and more. I was actually still at my Naval Commission, secret clearance, and my time serving as a Federal Maritime Officer counts for my time in service in the U.S. Navy for promotions and raises in grade and pay and more. We've touched on Posse Comitatus, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Coast Guard's ALJ system, and this is its administrative law judge system. It is military tribunals, and that's what they're doing, is they're actually using this system to prosecute people that are not in the Coast Guard. And this whole system under the APA, when the Coast Guard was a regular civil service, they were intended to use the Administrative Procedure Act for its own personnel as civil servants. They are trained on the Uniform Code of Military Justice, just as we are from Kings Point, because in times of a declared war, we come under the Department of Navy, and in my situation, my Naval Commission is activated. In the case of the Coast Guard, they may be detached or a detachment detailed to the U.S. Navy for specific issues overseas, like say in Iraq, or here in the United States to protect the country. The program called Deepwater, the 2 vessels called the Bertholf and the Vosch are part of this, and part of this gets into the Coast Guard being confused as to what its mission is. Is it a civil service? Is it a branch of military? Is it a special branch of military that can have its own system of courts to prosecute civilians here in the United States, whether it's in a time of war or a time of peace? This is unacceptable. There was also an incident with the Coast Guard, Genesis 6, where the nooses, like what occurred down in Genesis 6, nooses were put in the duffel bags of some cadets at the Coast Guard Academy. You start to see some of the events happening around the country, if not around the world, rising up all over the place within the Coast Guard. Not only the issues of the Costco Busan, but also the Exxon Valdez, how the Coast Guard played into this, and the issues of Commandant Thad Allen, who's the admiral in charge of the Coast Guard now, married to Pamela Hess, who is an heiress to the Hess oil family dynasty from back east, who is also related to Rudolf Hess, who was the deputy Führer in Nazi Germany. These are some of the rumors that are coming out, and when you couple that with issues of these two vessels in the national security class being named the Bertholf and the Vosch, two good German names, it starts to make one wonder. Issues of the International Maritime Police and turning the Coast Guard into an international agency rather than a national Coast Guard. Issues of the National Strategic Oil Reserve, where they're trying to create a mirror image of what the Navy has and create one within the Coast Guard, and the movement of $20 billion by President Bush is tied into this. How this affects you, I think hopefully from this four-part series you can see how carrying on military tribunals of civilians, whistleblowers, and even federal officers from other branches of service affects not only information getting to you, the citizen, the taxpayer, the consumer, but protecting you, your family, your city, your community, your state, and your nation, and your republic. There are so many more issues that we can get into. Contact information will play at the end of the show. I ask that you listen to these four-part series. They will be up on Yahoo and Google Video, and it will be playing on cable access in Van Nuys and here in Santa Monica. And I thank you. And think about it. Military tribunals of American civilians here in the United States going on, and that's a small piece of the pie in what's going on in all this. Please start to look into the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Coast Guard, the use of military tribunals, and the history in all of this, because those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you.
Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.